Hi and welcome to Live Your Language, tips and inspiration for your bilingual life. I am Stephanie, a PhD student in second language acquisition and a mother to two children that I'm raising trilingually actually, in my non-native language of French and also in Spanish.
C'est bleu.
C'est bleu? C'est vrai, c'est bleu.
And I know that if you're like me, you have read all about how to have bilingual children and how important language input is, especially from native speakers. They suggest going abroad and having your children see the language used in a context where everyone is using that language. And those experiences are so invaluable. However, as non-native speakers, we often don't have those connections that would allow us to have an extended stay in a country. We don't have family or friends especially who will let us stay with our young children who might tear up their house for months and months over the summer. So what we find is we have a really hard time sometimes having authentic experiences when you go traveling abroad. So you might find that you're experiencing your travel, if you can have it at all, as more of a tourist and not as somebody who is really integrated into the culture. So in this video, I'm going to offer just a couple of tips to make the most out of a quick trip if you have the opportunity to stay in a country where your target language is the majority language, in a way that will maximize your chance for authentic interactions and just overall make the most of a quick, short trip. We had a trip to Quebec City and we only stayed there for 48 hours. So these tips are inspired from our trip. So my absolute number one tip that was a total lifesaver for us was playgrounds. Oh my goodness, my 3-year-old, he needed to get out and to run and to stretch, and it was just really hard to do in a tiny rental where I was just worried that he would break everything or worried that he would jump up and down too loud and annoy the people below us. So we went out and we found some playgrounds, and I can't tell you how much I recommend this, because this was by far our best, every time we went, it was our best opportunity to find, people who spoke French as a native language, not just tourists, but people who spoke French with their kids actually playing together in a very natural context. Playgrounds were really valuable for us for 3 reasons. First of all, as a parent and as a non-native speaker, you can really go there and observe and listen to the language that parents use, authentic language that they use with their kids. What do they say to encourage them to come down the slide? What do they say to congratulate them for doing something that they were afraid of doing? What do they say when they push them and their child asks to go higher and higher? What do they say when they're chasing their kids around? What do they say when it's time to go home, it's time to go eat lunch? These were all things that I had questions about. I loved hearing the way parents actually interacted with their kids for real in that language. The other, of course, wonderful benefit of this is that your kids will be able to play with children who speak that language as a native language, or who speak it at all for that matter. Kids, they don't need to understand each other very well to go have fun. And I just love seeing this very natural interaction with other kids, and how much fun my son was having. And when they did speak, they understood each other and it was really great. But I just love to see him have fun with another kid in French. And lastly, I find that at playgrounds, you have a really great chance, at least in our case, of meeting super nice parents and talking to them, because you have a natural icebreaker, your kids, and there's a really good chance that your kids will actually start playing together, and that will open up a really great opportunity to start speaking with them. Some things you can ask, or that they might ask you, is how old is your child? You could comment on something their child's doing, like, wow, your child's already walking, how old are they? You can come up with a reason to break the ice a lot more easily with parents who are at the playground. At least I found that was our case. The next tip I have is to leave the touristy areas. This might be really difficult if you don't have a rental car, but if you can somehow walk to an area that's a little bit farther and get your groceries or get your breakfast, definitely do it. I found that it was really helpful to be in contexts where we actually left the area because in our touristy areas, there were a ton of English speakers speaking to their children, and we really, of course, wanted to make the most of our visit and hear French in the stores, and also, you know, to interact in French and that sort of thing. So when we finally got out of the touristy area and we went to, there was a Walmart, like a super Walmart, where you could get groceries, but also like other things like books and toys and clothes. We went there for a day to do some of our shopping for the weekend, and it was just really wonderful to see, you know, other parents there with their kids. There were children, whereas in the touristy area there were mostly adults, less children, but they were there nonetheless. So we actually got to see more people interacting with their kids. The other thing is that it just tended to be a lot cheaper to buy groceries and stuff from outside of the touristy areas. And in general, it just kind of felt a lot more normal. And I think that one thing that I learned with traveling with young kids is that they really need that sense of normalcy. I really craved something different, something new, and I love traveling. But for them, I quickly realized that they need anchors, they need routines and something that's similar to their normal context. And I think that shopping in a normal grocery store with like normal people doing normal things just really helped kind of lend to that sense of normalcy. So my next tip to you is to find used bookstores. We had to leave the touristy area to do this, but it wasn't that big of a deal. We actually were able to go there by foot and kind of go into an area that was closer to a university. If you've seen my previous videos, you know that I have not discriminated that much when I was looking for books in French. I would really honestly just take anything that had to do with cars or trucks or trains that I could find in on those websites for used books online. So when we finally got to this used bookstore, it was just like arriving in heaven, because there were just so many books on all sorts of topics, especially children's books, which people donate a lot because I guess they're, you know, their kids grow up and they get old and they can't read them anymore. And it was just so wonderful to have all those choices, and for really, really cheap, like relatively cheap. It was just amazing. Another tip I will give is, though, when you are searching, one thing that worked really well for me was to try and find those compilation storybooks, like one book with like 100 stories or 50 stories, or like, you know, 25 stories for toddlers, 50 best stories about dragons, like those sorts of things. The books that have multiple stories in them, now that we're home, like we read them all the time, and they're just like the gift that keeps on giving. I'm also going to suggest something else, and that is try and seek out a public library. We were fortunate in that the used bookstore was actually right across the street from a public library. Now this public library was like super quiet. They didn't really have a children's section like the one near our house does, but there were also a lot of books there, so it might be a nice place to go for an afternoon where you can access free books for children and have something to do that isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg. The next tip I will give is to take advantage of those forced interactions that you have with store clerks and with waiters and waitresses. As a tourist, basically, you're going to be interacting with those people, so see if you can strike up a conversation. The nice thing about these interactions is that these people are usually very, very nice to tourists and very tolerant of mistakes that you might be making, and they're also super friendly to children. So why not try and see if you can strike up a conversation with a waiter or waitress? It's also a really good idea because it's important for your children to see you interacting with others in that language, and that will reinforce the idea that this is an important language that's very useful and a good thing to know. And my last suggestion is going to be, if you're going on a super quick trip, come prepared with a list of the things that you want to come home with. I knew on my list there were a couple things that I absolutely did not want to leave Canada without. And those were word art things to decorate the house with. So like some encouraging positive words that I can put on the walls around the house, especially in my children's rooms. Like, you know, you can do it. I actually have one behind me right here, just to show you. This says, "Don't be afraid to try" in French. And we were at a Walmart in Canada, and we just got like a pack of 3 really inspirational, you know, art things like that, and I have them in my son's room. And I just got a ton of them, and I'm just so pleased and so glad that even though we're home now, we can bring that the French language into our house that way. Another thing that I knew I really wanted activity books, tracing books, things for the car. So another thing that was really fantastic that we were able to get is a like little flip book of trivia for like preschoolers, which was amazing for the car ride. Other things, games, things that normally have instructions that are difficult to translate. For me, I had a lot of trouble translating instructions for games, like roll the dice, take turns, those sorts of things. I also had a lot of trouble translating activities for books, like trace this, connect the dots, find the ones that match. And in those activity books and finding the games, that helped so much with me learning that vocabulary and also presenting those things in a natural way. You know, for example, going back to this vocabulary that is kind of specific to these activities, like I would say, you know, sometimes there are activities where it says circle this, circle the one that doesn't match. I was saying something to the equivalent of put a circle around this, or find which one looks like this one, when actually in English there's a far more natural way to say find the matching socks, or circle this, or color this. So I know that those books have really helped me grow as well in my vocabulary, and it's also just really nice to not have to look up everything while you're doing an activity for once. All right, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed these tips for quick trips as a non-native speaker raising a child. And if you liked what you heard, please let me know in the comments below. I try really hard to read every single comment and comment when I can. And yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.